going to get started. So if this is your first Purpose 828 session of the day, welcome. We're so happy you're here. I see a lot of familiar faces on the screen, so thank you for joining us again to kick off our afternoon session. And we have some really exciting things ahead for you all. So just a few reminders. If you've been with us, you've heard me before. If you could turn your cameras on, we would love to see your smile or your mask, your smile with your eyes. So excited to be together today, connected. I see a lot of faces I haven't seen in a while, which is so exciting. So thank you so much. Also, feel free to use the chat box throughout the session today. Comments, questions, feedback. I know Justin will be working through that as well. At the end of this session, we will be having a raffle. So just a reminder that you need to be present to win. We have some great prizes to give away this afternoon. So before I turn it over to him, this is a little bit of a blast from the past for me, because last year at Purpose 28, I also introduced him. So I'm very excited to bring him back a year later. Looks a little bit different because he's at home and I'm here in Fort Mill, but still we're so happy he's here today. So let me tell you a little bit about our next presenter. He is a father to 3, a husband to 1, and a loyal friend to many, who gets to lead a team of incredible professionals through his role as Vice President Operations for Furnitureland and a growing portfolio of Ashley Home Stores in Southern and Coastal Delaware. Justin is the founder of the SLAM Institute, which is Sales Learning and Management, an online training platform specifically designed for retail professionals and managers in the retail home furnishings business. Justin's declaration of purpose is, I am an instrument for life change in others. Without further ado, please join me in welcoming Justin Barnes. Justin, take it away.
Hello again, Broad River. I can't begin to tell you just how enthusiastic I am to be here today. And before I really proceed with any content this morning, I'd love to tell you a little bit about what I have been up to. You see, your contributions to my life last time I went there were so immense that I could not go home and remain the same. And so when I came home, I got straight to work with my team based on some of the things I learned from you. And I'd like to share a little bit about that with you this morning. You see, when I went home, I went straight to work creating something called the Transformative Retail Group. And I was so impressed with what I saw at Broad River, the way that you had standardized culture across multiple campuses, and you had really gone after the employee experience. I said, that's what I need to do. No matter what building someone occupies, no matter what job title someone holds, we need to standardize our employee experience and our guest experience and really standardize culture from a place of identity. I was so impressed with the way Broad River was clear on their values, was clear on their priorities, and all things flowed from identity and values. And so I came home to do the same thing. And the Transformative Retail Group, I'm proud to share with you today. We like to say we furnish 4 things. I know you memory makers furnish life's best memories. These are the 4 things that we like to use as our true north to help define our decision making in our organization. And they are as follows. Number 1, the first thing we furnish is, we like to say we furnish freedom. And for our sales associates in particular, this is a great example. We help to furnish freedom from the debilitating and limiting beliefs associated with what you thought you could earn. When people make this shift in our organization, and a lot like Broad River, and they go from working for a business to becoming a business, they liberate themselves from this idea of having some sort of capped income. And so we like to say we furnish freedom. Secondly, we like to say that we furnish connection. And the way we best describe that, I love some of the dialogue we've been having about diversity and inclusion today. And it really dovetails with the way in which we believe we furnish connection. We do so by a deep belief that connected people connect people. That as goes our connection as an organizational entity with one another, so goes our ability to connect people, to connect our customers to their lifestyle through the goods that we sell, to connect a family to greater connection and connectivity, to connect through home furnishings and through fashion and design, to connect people to a greater level of purpose. So connected people connect people. So we furnish freedom, we furnish connection, we also furnish purpose. What I saw at Broad River was nothing short of amazing. When I would walk into your stores, I would hear people say, you know what my purpose is we gave hundreds of beds to kids last year, and they would show me their why, and there was various things that they were so driven by purpose. And so we've come home and we've wanted to really emulate that in every way, and we've really gotten committed by being very active, particularly with schools and education, really getting very focused in the areas of purpose and inviting our stakeholder associates to partner with us in that, not just be a part of our giving, but to be a part of the larger thing. And then lastly, we like to say, we furnish transformation. We have a deep belief, much like you, my friends at Broad River, that we have a responsibility to leave people better than we find them. If I'm fortunate enough to lead a team of professionals for any given amount of time, then I have a responsibility to invest into them, to pour into them, to serve them at such a level that they don't leave my care the same as they entered it. And so by having this bent towards transformation of the associate and of the teammate, we're much more enabled to create spaces that transform lives. There is a continuity between the two. When you are obsessing over transforming others, that spills out into all you do and all you say. And the reason I want to share that with you as a precursor to today with Broad River is that I owe you such a debt of gratitude for the on switch that you helped to flip inside of my psychology in the way that our organization could be an extension of not only my identity, but that all things in my organization could flow from the corporate identity. And it's in that same sentiment of identity that I'd like to share with you something very special. Broad River today, you're going to get a very early look into some of the other work that I left Purpose 828 and decided to embark upon. And so if you can see my slide very well there, it is a title of a book. Now, it is a very rough slide. It is a preliminary draft, but I want you to hear the idea is ClarIDy is the title. And it is a transformative guide to demystifying what you really want by helping to uncover who you really are. And there's not a typographical error there. When you see that title of ClarIDy, the ID is in there for a reason, because much like Broad River, whose efforts are informed by their corporate identity, we too, at the human level, all things must flow from identity. And at times we get that backwards, where activity informs identity, and inevitably we end up with some challenges when that occurs. And so I'm out on this quest, about 35,000 words into this transformative guide, and I'm eager to share it with you this morning and very grateful for the opportunity. And if you haven't noticed by now, I am someone who is very driven by purpose, and so no grass grew under my feet over the last year when I came home, and I've just been so excited at making progress. But despite my natural bent towards purpose, towards achievement, towards destination, I'd like to set the context for today's discussion with a vulnerable moment. A time in my life when I lost my purpose. A time in my life when I actually descended to a low pit. A few years back, my wife and I used to ride out into this beautiful neighborhood. And in that neighborhood, there was a sod farm on the left. I want you to picture it. There's a river at the end that runs by a vineyard. And all of these things are within a mile of each other. And there's this small little subdivision in that community. We would ride out there, and we would look around and we would think to ourselves, if we could just raise our family out here, if we could just be so fortunate to have a home out here, my word, our life would be complete. There's nothing more we could ever want. Fast forward a few short years later, and we found ourselves, along with 2 of our 3 children, living in exactly that home. At that moment in time, our businesses were being optimized, and they were growing at an incredible rate and getting better all the time. Expansion, professionally, expansion was on the horizon. Not only was the business expanding, but my family was expanding. My wife was pregnant with our 3rd beautiful daughter. Her name is Stella. And we were so excited to welcome her into the world. But despite all of the wonderful things that had occurred, being in this dream home, a professional career that was headed in the right direction, optimism on the horizon, the expectation of my wife giving birth to another daughter. We were not just pregnant with a child, our lives were pregnant with possibility. It was that type of season. But despite all of that, I found myself slowly, just below the ability to notice, descending into a deep, sad state. And it happened at such a rate that it was beneath my consciousness. Until one morning, I was sitting at our table, and my wife said to me, my wife is so pleasant, Stacy, y'all should pray for her. She's so pleasant. She said, Justin, you have a few days off in the upcoming week. I want you to know you've been so good to us. We're going to do anything you want to do. At this point, unbeknownst to me, there was a slow current of rage moving beneath the surface. And I barked back at her. I said, I don't even know what I would want to do. I could have all the access to time and freedom in the world, but I have no clue what I want anymore. What I do know is that I'm going to a job that I hate, and that I feel like the room around me is getting smaller. I'm closed in on all sides. Stacy, being a sweet peacemaker, looked at me with her mouth open. And as soon as the words left my mouth, I realized, whoa, something is going on beneath the surface. As I drove to work that day, I began to consider what had happened that made me arrive at this low, low place. Everything on the scorecard said I was winning. Every external destination that I had wanted up to this point in my life was being achieved. Yet I found myself showing the warning signs of being depressed. What was it that occurred? Put my story on a shelf, folks, because I'd like to show you a theme of repeating patterns and how this has played out elsewhere and maybe more well-known individuals. How about a guy named Aubrey Huff? Aubrey Huff was most well-known for playing for the San Francisco Giants. What you might not know about Aubrey Huff, though, is that his dad died at a very, very young age. At the age of 7, he saw his mom struggling while she worked at Winn-Dixie as a single mom trying to provide for their family. And he told his mom, he said, Mama, I'm going to become a professional baseball player. And when I do, Mom, I'm going to buy you a car and I'm going to buy you a house and I'm going to take care of you. His mom kind of laughed it off. But little did his mom know that in her attempt to connect with her son and buying tickets to a Rangers game and taking him to Arlington Stadium, she planted in him a vision, a potential that he obsessed over seeing brought to reality. By the age of 9, he was consistently begging his mom, Mom, I need a pitching machine and I need a batting cage. If I can get a pitching machine and I can get a batting cage, I promise you, Mama, I'm going to hit 200 balls per day. 200, no matter what, rain, sleet, or snow. Scraping together everything she could. This 9-year-old's mom, along with his granddad, bought that pitching machine and constructed that batting cage in the backyard. Don't you know that Aubrey made sure rain, sleet, snow, sick, tired, no matter what the external circumstance was, he committed himself to hitting 200 balls per day. And with every ball that he would hit, he would visualize. From the age of 9, he would visualize the right field wall in Arlington Stadium, and he would see every ball that he would make contact with. He would see in his mind's eye that ball exiting the park over that right field fence. And so this was the way his life went. And because of his consistency and his diligence, I'm proud to tell you that in the year 2000, Aubrey signed with the Tampa Bay Devil Rays. And it was in that year when he got his signing bonus that he went and took his mom, he took her to the car dealership, said, pick whatever you want. His mom ended up picking a Dodge truck because she was still very practical. He said, okay, Mom, take your new truck and follow me. And he followed her to a beachfront bungalow in St. Petersburg. As he pulled into the driveway first, she pulled in behind, and he could see his mom just break down in tears. This 7-year-old boy who said, "Mama, I'm going to make it to the big leagues," did exactly what he said in providing her with that truck and that house. Fast forward a few years later, he had been traded and ended up with the San Francisco Giants. And the Giants had a tremendous year that year, so much so that it landed them in the World Series facing, guess who? The Rangers. On Halloween night, 2010, Game 4 of the World Series, Aubrey steps up to the plate and he sees what he had visualized his entire life, hitting those 200 balls every single day. And don't you know that in Game 4, he strikes the game-winning home run over the right field wall, winning Game 4 of the World Series. The Giants would go on to win in 5. And so here you have a guy who achieved everything he set out to achieve. He did for his mom what he said he would do. He accomplished the vision that was implanted deep within his heart of hitting that home run and winning that World Series. Yet between 2010 and 2012, Aubrey would see his marriage fall apart. He would give way to a raging addiction to Adderall. And late in 2012, he would eventually find himself in a closet with a .357 Magnum pointing to his head. What is it about this pattern of external achievement and obsession over an external goal that once met leaves us with the potential of falling into a deep, deep pit? And Aubrey is not the only one. And so if we want to consider Michael Phelps and other Olympic athletes, Michael Phelps won 28 medals, 23 of which were gold. He's very outspoken on the patterns that he has had when it comes to his battles with mental illness, and his colleagues in the Olympics, his peers. He often will say, we work so hard to get to these external goals that we're so obsessed over achieving. And then once we have them, what is next? Where do we find purpose after we have done that? And it's this consistent roller coaster of up and down and deep, deep lows. Perhaps you're skeptical and thinking, oh, well, I get it in terms of athletics, Justin. Well, what about comedian Dave Chappelle? Some of you may remember the Chappelle Show. And Dave Chappelle walking away from a $50 million contract. You heard me correctly. When his DVD series went on sale, it exploded beyond any other selling DVD series ever in history. And guess whose contract was up for negotiation? Just so happened his was. And there was a $50 million deal he had just signed. And yet he walked away. The rumors were that he had gone crazy and ended up in a mental institution. He was on drugs. But when asked by Oprah about what had really happened, there was three compelling statements that Dave Chappelle made that I think are very relevant to you and to me today. Number one, Oprah specifically asked him, she said, Dave, is it possible, because I've found this to be possible with other guests of mine, when the big moment hits, if you don't know who you are, listen to me, Broad River, when the big moment hits, if you don't know who you are, if you can't stand in the center of yourself, you are bound to be confused and thwarted. Is it possible that that's what occurred with Dave? Dave agreed. And Dave went on to say two very profound statements that shape a lot of what we're going to discuss this morning, and I would ask that you write these down. Dave said, number one, Oprah, it's hard to be yourself when everybody's watching. It's hard to be yourself when everybody's watching. You see, when we are externally motivated, when we are destination driven, we become who we need to become to get the outcome we desire. Imagine how that must be exacerbated in show business, but whether we want to admit it or not, all of us are in show business and learn to become who we need to become to get the outcome that we desire. And then he went on to say something else that really sticks with me. He said, Oprah, the other thing I learned through this is that success will often carry you places where your character cannot sustain. It's hard to be yourself when everybody's watching. Your character or your success can often carry you places your character cannot sustain you. In each of these cases, Broad River, in each of these cases, there was a collision at the intersection of activity and identity. And here's what I mean. When we are driven by external destinations, when we are extrinsically motivated and we really lean into the external, once I get here, I'll feel this way. Once I obtain this, I'll be this. There is a collision at the intersection of activity and identity. And here's what I mean. If the activity becomes our identity, then what happens when the activity has completed its work? Where then do we define our identity? The only sustainable path towards purpose, the only sustainable path towards purpose and impact and fulfillment in life is when identity informs activity. And sadly, we often get this mixed up. What good was it for Dave Chappelle to have a $50 million contract if the price he had to pay was his authentic identity? And as the interview unfolded with Oprah, he said, I was good at getting the outcome I desired. I might have been the best, but I had to do it at the expense of my values. I had to tell jokes that were socially irresponsible. When we are motivated by the extrinsic, when we are motivated by the extrinsic, when we're chasing the external destination, destination might inform direction, but the way we go about getting there can cost us our authentic identity. You see, when we're driven extrinsically, the lie we believe is that once I achieve this, I will feel this. Once I arrive at this destination, I will be fulfilled. Intrinsic says you already are fulfilled. Intrinsic is about being, whereas extrinsic is about becoming. If we can't be, like Oprah said, if we can't stand in the center of ourselves, when the big moment happens, we are bound to end up confused and thwarted. And for my good leaders at Broad River, which I believe you have some of the best in the industry, I want to point you towards some of Daniel Pink's work in the book Drive that talks about extrinsic motivations, and he uses the term carrot and stick. That carrot and stick reward structures will not lead to sustainable performance. That motivation has to shift from extrinsic to intrinsic. And here's what I mean. The intrinsically motivated person embraces the process. They embrace the adversity. They embrace the friction that comes with the journey. They're not waiting to arrive at a destination to find purpose. Their purpose is realized while undergoing the journey on the way to the destination. Do you see the difference, brother? It's so important that we learn to make that shift, and research backs it up. Often we become so externally focused and so destination minded that we learn to open programs in order to make us efficient at producing the desired outcomes. And at first we open these programs, we open these patterns, okay? When you hear me say programs, I want you to think patterns. Patterns of thought, patterns of behavior. We learn to open these programs and engage in these patterns because they get us the outcome that we're seeking. They take us to the destination we desire. The problem is what once started as something we could open and close on demand as a tool, all of a sudden the program hijacks the operating system. And here's what I mean. Windows is the operating system. It's the stable environment in which Excel and other Microsoft products can work. But when the program starts to compete with the operating system, the computer is going to crash. It's inevitable that when the program becomes no longer a program, but becomes the operating system, it becomes the norm in how we run, then a crash is imminent. All of the people that we mentioned, including myself, in the introduction, learn to run programs to achieve the desired outcome. And I believe I'm talking to a lot of achievers at Broad River. And I want to give you a word of caution, because before the computer crashes, before the program tries to overtake the operating system, I would encourage you that there is something far greater than self-help to prevent this from occurring, and that is self-discovery. Self-discovery is far greater than self-help. Now, I know that for some of you, this is a little deep, a little psychological maybe, but I want to break it down even another level more simple, because I'm pretty simple, believe me. My wife will corroborate that. And so imagine every day you're a hammer. You're a hammer. You've been made a hammer. And every day as a hammer, you wake up and you say, man, I'm going to be a screwdriver today. And so every single day you wake up, and no matter how much you twist and turn and move and maneuver and try to do your thing, you are totally ineffective. You get frustrated. You're confused. Why? What's happening? But suppose one day, that hammer wakes up and that hammer sees some nails. All of a sudden that hammer says, I think I was made for that. And all of a sudden that hammer finds great fulfillment in driving those nails into items, in securing things, in finally living with impact. Broad River, I believe I've been sent here today to awaken the hammer that's inside of somebody in this web conference, to tell you that the time has come to stop living as something that you are not, and to start living with impact like the hammer that is up inside of your heart. That's my belief here today. And if we want to do that, we want to awaken the hammer and awaken the impact and drive with purpose, then there's some good questions that we need to begin to answer. And so many of you may remember in the introduction, I said, I don't even know what I would want no matter how much time I have to invest in. I don't even know what I'd want to do. There's some better questions we need to begin asking. Instead of asking, what do I want? Or what is my purpose? We love to ask those things like, oh, I'm waiting to see what my purpose is, and then I will take action. We love to say those things, and they're these big, grandiose statements, and we're like, if we really knew, we'd be so overwhelmed by it, we couldn't take action anyway. But there's a better, more fundamental, way simpler question that's way harder to answer that we need to demystify today. This is ClarIDy. Who am I? Because once we know who we are, we know what we want. Once we know who we are, we know how our values, how to go about going and doing it. And we know what we do. We know we're the hammer. We know we are to live with impact in this type of way. Be the hammer. So we want to know, who am I? What are my values? And lastly, what is sacred? And these are three critical questions that I believe if we can answer, we can be the healthiest leaders that people would want to follow. We can live empowered lives that are focused on impact and service, and we can live fulfilled and more consistently and help to regulate some of the destination-driven peaks and valleys that grip our lives. And so if we're going to answer these questions, I'm going to first address the four forces, or four of the forces, that oppose our authentic identity. But before I do so, I want to take a moment and just make sure that if there are any questions, you can enter them in the chat, and I would ask that you do so. And so briefly, Heather, I just want to pause for a moment and say, are there any questions in the chat so far? And take a moment to pause.
Sure. We don't have any questions in the chat right now, but you guys feel free to drop them in as we go.
Perfect, perfect. So we're going to jump right into our four forces that are making a fuss in distorting our identity. Listen, don't make fun of my acronyms. It's the only way I can memorize stuff. And so there are four forces that are making a fuss. Number one is fear. Number two is our undefined values. Number three is the significant versus the sacred. More on that later. And number four are subtle agreements. And so if we're going to find out, who am I? What are my values? And what is sacred? we need to clarify all of the forces that are making the fuss. And so the first of which we want to start with is fear. We're going to start with fear. If you have noticed, Broad River, or if you're honest, many of us like to acknowledge that we are sensing or experiencing anxiety. It's very clear when we are experiencing anger. It's very clear when we experience envy. It's very clear when we experience or see hatred. But what if all of those were symptoms at the top of the funnel that were driven by fear? What if we could become so effective at managing fear that we could eradicate the way in which fear manifests itself through anxiety, anger, hatred, envy, etc.? Well, I have great news for you. There is a solution, and I'm going to get to it in just a moment, but I want to talk a little bit more about fear. You know, fear focuses on all of the things that could go wrong. Psychologists actually agree, though, that there is an antidote. It's something that you may have heard quite often, but the antidote to fear that I want to really dive in on today is gratitude. And so you may have seen me on social media or elsewhere. You know that I'm a big proponent of gratitude. And I want to be clear that I'm not the first person to ever present gratitude as an antidote to fear. I can't take credit for that work. Psychologists agree. Some self-help gurus like Tony Robbins and others, they all agree. But I really would like to drill down on what we see occur when we practice gratitude. Did you know that when our brains are illuminated, scientists have found it impossible for you to be both fearful and grateful at the same time? It is completely impossible to experience both fear and gratitude in the same psychological space. That's a big point. See, gratitude shifts our focus from scarcity and what we're worried about and shifts it into things that have already occurred and things for which we are grateful. And in doing so, it helps to activate something called the reticular activating system. Now, I promise I'm no psychologist, but I want to really present this to you because it's very important. Have you all ever noticed that when you buy a car, all of a sudden you hadn't seen that car too much, but now you see it everywhere? That's your RAS at work, your reticular activating system. Right now, where you are in your office, I want you to do me a favor, and some of you have done this before, so please indulge me and do it. I want you to look around your office right now for the next 10 seconds, and I want you to find everything in that office that is green. Go. Find everything that's green, find everything that's green, find everything that's green, find everything that's green. Okay, stop. Now, if I were there, write down everything that you saw that was yellow. You didn't see anything that was yellow, but your mind tried to even take things that were close to green and make it appear green. That's your RAS at work. Here's the correlation with gratitude. Stick with me here. This is critical. When we program ourselves to live in gratitude, when we program ourselves to be grateful, all of a sudden we become more aware of the moments throughout the day for which we should be grateful. All of a sudden our radar shifts from the things that we're worried that are going to occur, from the things that we're hoping to avoid, the scarcity. All of those things disappear because we now are focused on all of the things for which we are grateful. And so it's very important to me that you understand what I believe is a very effective practice at implementing gratitude daily. What I hope to give you today, Broad River, is very practical ways that you are going to work through the distortion of your personal, authentic identity. And the way I do it is daily, I write down 5 things for which I'm grateful, 5 things. And all of those 5 things are from the last 24 hours. What I'm finding as I've done this now for several years is that I am always grateful for who, not so much what. Interesting trend there, relationships matter. But the key to the gratitude, this is where most people miss it. And if you can get to this level of depth, I promise you, you will stick with it. When you're writing your gratitude, you need to train yourself to re-experience the moment in your mind's eye. Yesterday, I was at the beach with my kids and my wife, and my daughter, she's 5, Addison, she just began boogie boarding. And she kept saying, watch me, Daddy, because she's being so courageous in those big waves riding that boogie board, and I was so proud of her. But you know what was etched in my brain was as she looked up at me, she has these big, bright blue eyes. I mean, her eyes are a refuge of peace for me. And when I see those, and then I write about it, and I re-experience that moment in my gratitude journal in the morning, it's not uncommon for tears to stream down my face. Now, I recognize for this 6'3", 230-pound country boy that it might be against my masculinity to admit that, but I want to let you know something, Mr. Big and Strong. There is power. There is power in your gratitude, because remember, gratitude and fear can't coexist in the same place. And so, as I am filled up with this gratitude, I can walk through walls. There are times when I even lean into gratitude in such a way when I'm training or working out and I need to go harder and I want to push beyond my limits. I actually lean into gratitude. I actually lean into these moments that I've experienced of overwhelming love and joy that take me to that place and fill me with immense power. So, force number 1, seeking to oppose our authentic identity, is fear, and our antidote is gratitude. And I would encourage you to develop a daily system, but it's not enough to just list it and go through the motions. You need to re-experience those moments and learn to re-experience them. And I promise you, what will happen is that reticular activating system will do what it was designed to do, and you will be aware. You'll just be opened up in a whole nother way and celebrating all of the ways in which you are living better than you deserve. It is absolutely incredible, and I can't emphasize it enough. And so now that we have implemented gratitude, we need to deal with the second force that opposes our authentic identity, and that is undefined values. Undefined values. This is a very, very big deal here. As I mentioned, for us achievers, and those of us who are destination minded, and all of those people in our previous examples, the pattern of, oh, I've achieved and now I'm low. Oh, I've achieved and now I'm low. We become so obsessed over destination that at times we will compromise our values in the route to the destination. We will make choices and choose behaviors that are in conflict with our very nature, with our authentic identity, and this creates this unresolved inner tension. Here's what I mean. Some of you may be familiar with what's called the DISC profile, and if you're not, it's not a big deal. But in the DISC profile, I'm a high D and a high I. A high D is a demanding, driving, forceful, deliberate, decisive. But a high I is gregarious and outgoing and loves to be persuasive and is really people-centric. The problem is at times the high D in me that's driven, deliberate, decisive, and is going to go for that destination, that will often put me on a path where I might run over people on my way to produce outcomes, creating an inner tension. This is what I'm talking about when I point to the tug of war that's created between our values, our authentic identity, and the choices and behaviors that we engage in to get the destination. Put a little bit more simply, there are times when I value productivity over connectivity. And when I place a higher premium over production than I do connection, that I'm in conflict with myself. Because my values question, my big values statement or analysis is based on what does love require. And if all of a sudden I'm running over people on my way to produce outcomes, then there is an inner tension that builds and builds and builds inside of us. And how many are vulnerable enough to admit that as pressure builds, it does find an escape? And as we survey our peers in the workforce, as we survey society at large, we see tension escaping mostly in disempowering ways. And we saw several examples of that as we opened today's discussion. Now, I have great news for you though. What if we could take the choices and behaviors and get all these people on the same side of the equation as these people? Imagine how much force and momentum and inertia we could create as opposed to fighting ourselves. We could all of a sudden create greater alignment. And when there is greater alignment within ourselves, when there is alignment between who we are and what we do, when there is alignment between our choices and our behaviors and values, all of a sudden we create tremendous force and momentum in the right direction. You see, Broad River, you understand this from the organizational level because you have lived it. But do we understand it at the individual level? As I survey my friends and family, so many people identify who they are by what they do as opposed to choosing what they do by who they are. We get the equation backwards. And if we want to create incredible momentum and force towards the greatest purpose and impact of our lives, we have to align our values with our behaviors and our choices. Values are a lot like guardrails. You see, destination, that vision that Aubrey Huff had of what he was going to do for his mom and hitting that home run, that vision that my wife and I had of getting that house in that neighborhood, all of those extrinsically motivated destinations, they might define direction, but values define how we go about getting there so that we don't crash and run off course. Dave Chappelle, what good would it have been for a $50 million contract if the price he had to pay was his authentic identity? Values help us to keep integrity. It's funny, a lot of people would say their values integrity. Integrity really means oneness. If the cost for the $50 million was his authentic identity, it's more than he was willing to pay. And for many of us, I think that that holds true. Values are the guardrails. Destination may define direction, but we need values to ensure that we get there the right way and that we have alignment, creating the necessary momentum and force in the proper direction. And so, as we think about values, I want to transition to the sacred versus the significant. And don't get lost in what you're seeing up here yet, please, folks. Also kind of related to our values is something I call the sacred versus the significant. And I think the best way for me to illustrate this is kind of telling you about my Friday morning commutes. I'm off on Thursdays. Like you, I work in retail. And I can't tell you the amount of years, probably ever since my son was born, my oldest, he's 8. On Friday, I would drive to work and there was this tension. And on my way to work, I would be taking inventory of the way I had spent my time the previous day. Off on Thursday, remember. And I'd go through my day off and I'd think, I washed the car, I cut the grass, I made some repairs on a rental house, I checked my emails, I got on social media, and I started looking, I watched a movie, and I started looking at the ways in which I was spending my time. And I felt this heavy burden of shame. Because I realized that what was sacred would be spending time with my son or my kids or my wife or investing in people that I love. But what I was choosing were things that were masquerading as sacred, but were actually only significant. And about this same time, I'm experiencing this tension. I ran across a book called Essentialism. And essentialism is not like minimalism. It's about what's essential. How do we start from what's essential and organize our lives around what's essential? And it prompted me to take this exercise. And I said, okay, there's approximately 168 hours in a week. How do I divide these hours and fund what is sacred with time so that I can stop living with such a heavy burden of tension? And so that's exactly what I did. This pie graph is actually my personal allocation of time. Here's the really crazy thing, though. You hear that 168 hours? When I was done and I funded my 4 buckets with time, and my 4 buckets of time for me based on what's sacred is my faith, my family, my relationships, and my physical well-being. Those are my 4 sacred things. If you don't know your 4 sacred things, that's a big, big point of tension. I funded the 4 sacred things with adequate time. And after I funded those 4 things with adequate time, and I took out for sleep and work, I was left with 3 hours per week to invest in anything that was significant. You see, we think we have this unlimited bandwidth to take on more. I got to tell you, the biggest and most empowering truth that came out of this exercise for me was permission to say no, permission to have boundaries, permission for me to fund the areas of my life that were truly sacred so that I could be focused like a laser and have tremendous power and depth in those areas. This same exercise is something I would encourage you to do as you work through the opposing forces working against your authentic identity. It's simple. Sit down, figure out what is sacred in your life. List those things out and say, if these are sacred, how should I fund them with time? I have a Friday night date night with my wife. I fund that with time. I have playtime every single day with my kids, 30 minutes after work. I fund that with time. I talk about it with my wife so that when I get home, that first 30 minutes, I do nothing but play like a wild nut with my kids. Very, very important, because when you build systems and you fund these things with time, you can finally stop living with so much tension because you are living in alignment. Very similar to values here, but slightly more nuanced, okay? So just a quick review. The opposing forces so far that oppose our authentic identity: fear, undefined values, and the significant masquerading as sacred. You need to be clear on what is sacred and fund that with time, because when we fund it with time, it says this is sacred. All right, so we're going to move into our final distorting force when it comes to our identity for today's discussion, and that is something I like to call subtle agreements. Subtle agreements. You remember I talked about just in that last slide about how I would drive to work and feel ashamed. I would feel like I wasn't an effective daddy, a present daddy. I would feel this guilt. Well, what happens if I start to make subtle agreements with those statements? Oh, maybe you're not a good dad. Oh, maybe you're not a husband. Oh, maybe you are selfish. Those are subtle agreements. And you see, all of us, our entire lives, for years and years and years, have been inundated with opportunities to make subtle agreements. You know, subtle agreements are a lot like a steak marinade. Boy, it is getting ready to be Friday night, and I got to tell you, I can't wait to eat a steak. But when we put that steak in a marinade, it takes on the flavor of that which surrounds it. So how does this work in terms of subtle agreement? Well, 95%, much like was mentioned by our previous guest, Dr. Pierce, 95% of our thoughts are subconscious. This is very, very important. Meaning 95% of what's going on up here is happening beneath our level of awareness. Only 5% of what's going on is conscious. Well, if we have years and years of compounding subtle agreements that are distorting who we believe we are, you're not enough. You're not a good mom. You can't be fully present. You have ADD, so you're dumb. All of the ugly things that we begin to make, these ugly, lying agreements with ourselves, all of a sudden they wear these paths in our brain called neuropathways. And our brain, which is looking for efficiency, continues to circulate these things beneath the surface. And before you know it, our external behaviors and choices are being driven by programs that we're not even aware are running beneath the surface. It's crazy. It's as if we're on autopilot, but the autopilot has been informed by disempowering beliefs about ourselves. This is the distorting power of subtle agreements. And so the good news is there's something we can do about it. In his book, Inner Size, John Assaraf said he compared neural pathways in our brain to game trails in the woods. And I'm, again, no psychologist, and so this was so liberating for me to understand this. You see, if you walk in the woods and you see a game trail, some animal, in my area it's likely a deer, has taken that path routinely. Maybe a bunch of deer have taken that path routinely, and as a result, the grass gets trampled and the brush gets pushed back. Well, with every additional piece of foot traffic, the path becomes more well-worn. The more traffic that takes the path, the easier it is for more traffic to take the path. Traffic begets more traffic. Do you follow me, Broad River? The more traffic that goes down this game trail, the more traffic can flow through the game trail unimpeded. Well, we tend to only think about this in negative ways, because when I talked about those subtle agreements, some of you, if you're honest and you're actually willing to be vulnerable, some of those subtle agreements, the first thing you thought of were negative things about yourself. Some of the subtle agreements you've made about how you look, about the level of achievement you're going to attain, and about regret from your past. But the good news about these neural pathways is that if we can train them in a negative way, guess what neuroplasticity tells us? That we can change our brain in a positive way. We can create new empowering game trails that will remove the distortion. And here's what I mean. Daily habits. If you haven't guessed, I'm big on daily habits. And you see this I am statement behind me. One of the things I do daily, in addition to gratitude, is I write down 20 affirmations about, in my case, who my Creator says I am, about who I would be if I were living in my best state. Who is Justin Barnes? And so I write these things daily, and I visualize myself being this person. Here's why this is so important. Those game trails did not happen overnight. The disempowering game trails that are distorting who we are did not happen overnight. For those of you who believe, like I believe potentially, and are familiar with your Bible, perhaps you remember all of the people who had all of the issues that Jesus healed. All of those people, the man, the crippled man with the crippled hand, the paralytic, all of the people, the leper, the blind man, the beggar, none of them even were called by name. Their identity became their issue. After years and years of being identified by all of the thing that's wrong with them, that was all they were known by. They no longer even had a name. This is what happens when our issues become our identity. And so we must have something that works contrary to that. The truth that works contrary to that, that we consistently deploy into our psychology to create a better, more empowering pattern of thought. That's why our buddy Paul in the Bible talks about, don't be conformed to the patterns of this world, but be transformed through the renewing of your mind. Yes, psychology teaches a lot, but this is ancient wisdom that's been around for years and years. This is a practical way in which we can renew our mind, create empowering neural pathways. And remember what I said about 95% of thought being subconscious. You can't control your brain. I know some of you have tried this. You can't control 95% of your brain with only 5% of it being conscious. A lot of us have tried that, like, you can't think that. You can't do that. It doesn't work, because the more you focus on what you shouldn't do or what you shouldn't think or what you shouldn't say, the more you gravitate towards it. But what you can do with the 5% that's conscious is you can train your brain. I want you to think about the 95% of your subconscious brain as an 800-pound gorilla. There's no way that I can make that thing conform to what I want. But what I can do over time is I can train it. That's what affirmations do daily for me and what they can do for you. And so some examples of my daily affirmations is, I'm a gentle and patient dad. They're always I am statements. I am equipped for the good works that have been placed in front of me today. I am optimistic. I have been chosen. I am forgiven. I am loved by many on earth and by my Father in heaven. I am authentic, one of a kind. I know who I am, and because I know who I am, I can live, lead, and make decisions from values. I am generous. I am teachable. These are all examples of things that I'm going to write about myself daily, because I want to create these new empowering neural pathways that will help me to live to the standard to which I was created. I refuse, Broad River, and today is your invitation to refuse as well, to live beneath the standard for which I was created. I was made like that hammer to drive with purpose and impact, and I refuse to have thinking that does not support that. And so I'm going to renovate my thinking by whatever means necessary so that I become the man I was created to be. So a brief summary as we wrap up today. 4 opposing forces: fear, undefined values, the sacred versus insignificant, and subtle agreements. And what we're going to do about each one. Fear will be overcome by gratitude, the multiplying force of gratitude. Undefined values, the action step that you need to take, Broad River, define your values. For some of you, that's going to be a list. For others of you, maybe you'll just install a question like I did. What does love require? If we're honest about that before we take action, we will live with less regret and less tension. If you will commit yourself to working through the exercise of defining how your time will be deployed every week and being very clear on that, then you will have great clarity on what is sacred versus what is significant. And you'll know how to deploy your time accordingly. And then lastly, if you would commit yourself to daily affirmations, daily visualizing yourself in the true identity, not the distorted identity of subtle agreements, but your true authentic identity, then you can live empowered in your authentic state. But it takes a daily commitment. At this time, I want to open it up for questions and again express my sincere gratitude for allowing me to be a part of your message today.
That was awesome, Justin. I don't know if you're seeing the
Yeah, I see you.
the chats, but the chats are pretty active right now.
Well, thank you. I'm happy to take any questions. I'm very early in this journey on this book, and so I'm just grateful to share it because I hope it can make an impact on anybody that's within the sound of my voice today.
When's the book going to be published?
I don't know yet. I'm writing a book proposal now. I kind of did it backwards. I wrote the book before I wrote the proposal, but I have some mentors that are kind of helping me now, so I'm going to get on track.
That's great. I look forward to reading it.
Thank you, man. Appreciate your encouragement.
Any questions for Justin, you guys?
Don't be shy, Broad River. I'm like you. I'm in the furniture business, so bring it. Hit me.
Sarah Sanchez raised her hand.
I think she's waving to someone.
Oh, never mind. How long have you been doing the daily affirmations in your morning system?
I'm several years into gratitude. I think probably 4 years into gratitude, and I'm 18 or 19 months into affirmations.
Wow. And you do it 7 days a week, 4 days a week, 5 days a week, or every single day?
You know, my wife and I talked about this last night. I don't know what it is, but Thursday, day off, for whatever reason, she and I both skip our systems. And I don't know why. I guess it's a day we deviate from that, but we both acknowledge that we don't operate at the same level without our systems. So interesting. So it's at least 6 days a week, often 7 for me.
There is one.
You have a question in the chat. Jesse wants to know, how do you do your daily affirmations? Do you write them down somewhere?
Yes. So if you're thinking about a gratitude journal, on the left side every day, which would be the back of the previous day, I write my 5 things for which I'm grateful. On the right side, I write my 20 affirmation statements. And sometimes, some days I'm overflowing. I mean, it might be 25 or 27. So don't get hung up on the number. I don't care if you do 3. For me, I need that. And so I like to have that many, but it doesn't have to be a complex notebook or a complex system just so you're doing it. But it's not enough to just do it and check it off. So many people are like, oh, I've been doing this and it doesn't work. You have to do it and you have to see it. The same way that I expressed how when you experience gratitude, you have to learn and train your brain to re-experience that moment. When it comes to affirmations, you have to see yourself living that way. So sometimes I'm not proud of the fact that I'm not patient with my kids and I'm a little bit demanding. So that's where the affirmation came from, that I'm a gentle and patient daddy. My wife will even tell you that as I have practiced that in my mind's eye, seeing myself be the dad that I want to be, I have become much more gentle and patient. It's crazy. But that's a key element, is this idea of visualization. And I recognize that people are like, man, this guy's talking all deep and stuff. I got to tell you, these habits will change your life.
There's a question from Michael Childers, Heather.
Okay, Justin, Michael Childers would like to know, how can we watch your sermons on Sunday?
Well, you're kind of asked. What I'll start doing is I'll just always send the link to Charlie if that's what you guys like. I pretty often mostly speak at Emmanuel Wesleyan Church in Salisbury, Maryland. But I'll be happy to send them to Charlie anytime I do it. And I appreciate you encouraging me by asking that. It means a lot because I'm not a trained pastor. I'm not a trained speaker. I'm a furniture guy. I actually came up in the warehouse, ran the warehouse for about a decade. So this is all kind of new to me, but I love it, and being an instrument for life change on whatever platform that I'm granted.
Justin has sent me a couple of sermons. The most recent one was Hidden Potential, and I forwarded it out to a few people, and I will send it to Lindsay or Heather, and we can send it to this audience here if you guys are interested.
Yeah, thank you.
Justin, I also have a question here from our friend Josh at One Word Brand. He wants to know, where can he follow you on social media?
Well, you're kind. I really only have my personal social media account, so you're welcome to hit me there. It's just Justin Barnes. Just make sure you're looking for the one that's in the Eden, Maryland or Salisbury, Maryland area, because I'm sure there's a few of us. And from there, I'll be happy to kind of let you know where we'll be from there. I am working on building out a website that will support my book, and there'll actually be some values profiles that will allow people to have some online tools so they can do a values assessment, as well as the sacred significant exercise will be created in a digital fashion. And so I'll be happy to kind of keep people aware through my personal Facebook once I'm up and live with that. Again, I'm very early in this process and couldn't be more grateful for Broad River giving me the opportunity.
Great. I got another question, Justin. Now they're rolling in. Do you post your sermons on social media?
Sometimes I share them, but not all the time. But I'm willing to do that. I appreciate the fact that you all seem so interested. I guess we always are critical of our own work, so we're like, if somebody likes it, they'll just share it through the church Facebook. But I can certainly be more active in that. And Charlie has a blank check from me to share anything I ever do. I'm happy to do it.
Also, he posts a lot of videos on LinkedIn too. Sometimes his morning routine, he posts about 4 a.m. when he's going to the gym. You get it out. You wake up at a certain time every morning, don't you?
5:08.
5:08. Why exactly 5:08 a.m.?
Just I don't know why it worked out that way, but it's the perfect time for me to have my little caffeinated pre-workout, get to the gym where we do kind of a very intense CrossFit style type workout. Listen, I realize my physique doesn't show it because I eat like garbage, but I believe in exercising to the point of just sheer exhaustion. Our average exercise will be over 1,000 calories. I can't overstate the importance of that in your morning routine as well on your psychology, what your brain releases, etc. It's much more than just feel-good hormones. What it does to your ability to learn and to be teachable and to express empathy, it's just crazy.
So what time do you go to bed?
I'm in bed at 9. I'm asleep by 10.
Okay.
I'm very disciplined for a 39-year-old.
Young. It's young. What's your favorite one-word brand shirt? You've got 3 of them now.
Courage.
Courage. Why courage?
Because that's one of my daily affirmations. I am courageous. Courage doesn't mean we don't experience fear, but it means that we're going to make a conscious choice to choose courage over fear. It's one of I wear it to work out quite often. So shout out to the one word people. I love that shirt. Thank you.
Okay, thanks guys for all of your questions. Justin, thank you so much for joining us again this year at Purpose 828, the Encore Edition. I just have a few more things before we wrap up here, you guys. As a reminder, this session has been recorded and we will share this back out with you. We do have some thank you gifts on our way to you, the official Purpose 828 sticker and your bed gear performance mask. And before we wrap up for the day, hold on tight. We do have a raffle prize for this particular session. And today I will be giving away a 55-inch TV. So, this goes out to, and I see her face on my screen right now, my friend in the flagship enterprise, Ava Richardson. Oh, she's dancing. If you guys can't see her, she's dancing on the screen with Patricia. Congratulations to you, Ava. We will get you your TV. You guys, thanks again for joining us today. Thank you so much to you, Justin, and we will see you guys at our next session. Have a great day.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.